It's now time for your Election Crimes Bulletin with Greg Palast.
Yes, it is. Greg Palast. Welcome. Dennis Bernstein here. We have a bunch to talk about. Let's start with, there was, I think, an election in New York City. The Republicans were sort of busy doing something else. But what, Greg Palast, welcome back. What is your most significant takeaway of recent election results? It looks like the Dems and the progressives are going to win a few elections.
Well, let's see. Again, it's not who votes, it's who counts the votes. And one thing that political operatives are keeping a sharp eye on is New York. While the message is the Democratic Socialist won, the people that followed the voting game, as I do, noted that Mamdani won by 200,000 votes. And the early vote in New York, mail-in and early voting, was 735,000. That's where his margin came in. And understand that New York was one of the last states to allow early voting. It was opposed by the Cuomo gang. Both Mario and Andrew did not like early voting because they know when you have early voting, about 70% of people of color vote early in person or by mail. So you now have this avalanche of mail-in and early voting, 735,000 and 750,000. And that was your margin for Mamdani. So you now understand where they're going to be focusing. So the GOP has, in 6 states in this year alone, organized attacks on the right to vote. Arkansas, for example, and let's not forget, some of these states, don't assume that they're all red. And remember, there's a lot of congressional races. In Arkansas, to mail in your ballot, you're going to have also mail in a signed affidavit from someone saying, you are the person that filled out the ballot. This is, it's a kind of, in other words, an obstacle course to run through. Indiana, you're going to need a passport or a birth certificate to prove you're a citizen to vote. Absentee. Kansas, Kentucky are aiming to overrule governors in those states. In Indiana and South Dakota, we have a new opening. Laws have been passed to allow vigilante voter challenges, which if you mail in your ballot and someone challenges your ballot, you won't even know it and you'll lose your vote. So mail-in voting is a really big issue, and that is one of the reasons why Trump is going out after mail-in voters, because that is how minorities vote these days. And so that's a big thing. And then we also have the issues of the gerrymandering. But go ahead. I don't mean to interrupt you.
And just to underline the point, again, remind us how many were early voters in this New York election? What percentage?
750,000 voters voted early, and that completely explains Mamdani's win, who won by 200,000 votes. When you let people vote, they vote progressive, and everyone knows that, whether it's the right wing of the Democratic Party or the Republican Party as well. That's why they are going after mail-in. Why Trump has gone after mail-in voting and early voting, and you have a
and what does that battleground look like now in terms of Trump? You say Trump's going after the mail-ins, and what do we know about his modus operandi?
Well, anything that will stop. You have 6 states which have now, in just this year, about 22 states altogether, have made it more difficult to vote by mail or use mail-in or use dropboxes to put in your ballot. Because what they do is they cut the number of voting stations in low-income student areas and minority areas. They cut the number of early voting stations, early drop box, and cut the number of voting stations. You have these long lines that last for hours. Like when I was in Atlanta, there was a good 3-hour wait for people in the black community to vote. I went to the white suburbs. There was zero wait. I see this all over the country. I saw this in Ohio. I saw this in in other areas where you have these long lines in communities of color, zero lines in white communities. So that means that people want to use drop boxes or mail in their votes, and so they stop that. So that they stop you at every end you can imagine. And then we also have this time these fights over gerrymandering. As you know, Texas famously did a mid-census rejigger of their maps to try to gain 5 Republican seats. Obviously, Proposition 50 in California passed, which would probably give Democrats 5 more seats. And you say, well, that kind of evens it up, but it doesn't, because in Missouri, the Republican legislature looks like they're going to take out the Democratic seat in Kansas City. In North Carolina, which was 7-7 Democrat-Republicans, because North Carolina is quite split politically. They already gerrymandered a 7-7 split in North Carolina, which kind of reflects the voter the number of voters in each party. And they've changed that to 10-4 Republican-Democrat, a huge gerrymander, and now they're going after one more seat in North Carolina. In Indiana, let's not forget Obama won Indiana in 2008. The Republican legislature in Indiana is trying to slice out 2 Democratic seats. 2 of 5 Democratic seats are in danger in Ohio, and there might be one pickup of Democrats, with this retaliation gerrymandering, but just 1 in Maryland. In other words, if you're in this gerrymander war, the GOP has all the firepower.
Yes.
And what's I'm not for one party or the other. The problem is that, in a democracy, the voters are supposed to pick the politicians. But in the Republican push to reach all the lines, you have the politicians picking the voters, not the voters picking the politicians. It doesn't sound like democracy, but there is a reaction. For example, in Georgia, political operatives like Karl Rove and others are noting that is one of the most important elections of this week on Tuesday, which was the Georgia Public Service Commission. Now, you may think, well, who the hell cares? Well, a lot. Number one, 2 Democrats took over they're the group that sets electric rates. So number one, it shows that when people are pissed off about kitchen table issues, they're going to come out and vote. So the Democratic Party was able to get people out for this, what is normally considered an obscure election over the Electric Pricing Commission, the Georgia Public Service Commission, which I've testified in Georgia on that. And the issue there was the Vogtle nuclear plant. And this is the only nuclear plant that's been built in America in 30 years. And people are getting crushed on their utility bills to pay for this nuclear plant. You remember nuclear power is supposed to be too cheap to meter? Well, because of this ridiculous nuclear plant. And what is it for? It's for AI and crypto. And that's going to be the big upcoming battle line. Who's going to pay for these billions and billions of dollars of new electric plant operations, especially nuclear, which I testified about the Vogtle nuclear plant for the Georgia Public Service Commission. And you're talking about maybe $100 billion of additional charges, which are, is Bill Gates going to pay for that? Is Mark Zuckerberg going to pay for that? They're imposing all these massive costs of electricity, and people, they make like AI, they make like crypto, but who's going to pay for it? So that's a real serious kitchen table issue coming up, and it's motivating people to go to the polls. And needless to say that Georgians, with all their attacks on voters, and there again, they try to stop the progressive vote by cutting the number of mailboxes, mail-in ballot drop boxes in Atlanta by 75%, and in Savannah by 75%, but they increased the number of mail-in drop boxes in white counties. They actually increased those. They still could not pull this off because people just don't want to pay those electric bills. So there's, and again, it's the kitchen table issues which are making the difference, which are overcoming these vote suppression tactics.
All right. Well, let's Apparently, Trump isn't going to give up easy. It's not looking good at the polls. What can he do that's invisible? What are the things that we might not be seeing? And do you suspect that he'd literally send the troops to seize what would be the pretense for seizing the voting machines? They were corrupted, like the 2016 election? Wasn't?
I think it's going to be a soft coup d'etat. That is, we already know from starting with Bush v. Gore and even before that with Jim Crow, et cetera, if you change the voting rules and the voting systems, removing voters of color, challenging voters of color, making it more difficult for young voters and others to vote, you don't have to seize the voting machines because you've already basically laid siege to them, keeping out the voters you don't like. So, for example, in Indiana and South Dakota, and again, I want to remind you, Barack Obama won Indiana in 2008. So they are restoring in those states that old Jim Crow vigilante vote challenge system where I can say Dennis Bernstein shouldn't be allowed to vote in California. That's now law in Indiana and South Dakota, and that is being pushed by True the Vote, the organization which allied with Charlie Kirk. If they can challenge your vote, block your vote. In Kansas and Kentucky, they are they've already voted to overrule governors who have vetoed anti-voting measures. In Indiana, you'll need a passport or a birth certificate to vote. In Arkansas, witness affidavit. Six states have passed new mail-in voting restrictions. And also there's something, and this is not a minor thing, in several states, Republicans are setting rules that say if you mail in your ballot, it has to arrive on Election Day. Well, then it's up to the post office whether your vote counts, not up to the voter. But even more, if they find some error, and about 1 in 7 mail-in ballots have some type of minor clerical error on them, that vote will be thrown out unless you go in to cure it. The curing is the official term for fixing your ballot, and you have to do that in some states now. This is brand new on Election Day. This is almost impossible. And understand, mail-in voting is not minor. In COVID, most people mailed in their votes. We're still closing in on nearly half of American voters vote early or by mail. So this is not minor stuff, the attack on mail-in voting at all. So that's what I'm worried about. It's a soft coup. It's not troops in the street grabbing the ballot boxes. It's seizing control of the procedure to make it impossible or difficult for voters of color, students, and others to vote.
We have a couple of minutes, Greg. You want to take another quick shot at the unfolding war zone, Venezuela, somewhere that you know a lot about, where you've spent a whole bunch of time reporting for BBC. What's your take? You see it going apace? Are you expecting invasions? The killings are continuing.
The killings are continuing, and the U.S. media is falling for a terrible canard. There are boats that leave Venezuela that go 7 miles to the coast of Trinidad. People commute. Workers go from Trinidad to Venezuela to work in the oil industry. And they were blowing up these little commuter boats. And then on the other side, that's in the Caribbean, because if you're a drug dealer, you're not going to be moving drugs from Venezuela to Miami. But you will be moving drugs from Colombia up the Pacific coast. And they have, in fact, of course, attacked. They found a submersible with kind of a semi-submarine taking drugs, etc. And they're conflating that with Venezuela. So you're talking about, it's not the Colombian government's fault. The Colombian government has been fighting these. By the way, Petro, the progressive leader of Colombia, has been fighting these cartels, as has Claudia Sheinbaum, the president of Mexico. But there's certainly drugs coming up that coast. These are not coming from Venezuela, but we're using that as an excuse for a potential invasion, killing, kidnapping, or assassinating President Maduro. And I'm very concerned that the U.S. news and media is not I know you're shocked to hear this, the U.S. media is not investigating or pointing out that these boats are not coming from, the ones with actual drugs are not coming from Venezuela. And also you have the president of Venezuela is actually Maduro, has been trying to convince Trump that he will work with Trump to cut off any drug dealers that they find. But, finding drug dealers in Venezuela is like, remember, he's accused Canada of being a major source of fentanyl, and it's about the same for Venezuela. It's almost a joke, except people are dying. And so it's not a joke anymore.
All right, that's Greg Palast. We appreciate all the good information, Greg, for joining us weekly to help us protect the elections. Hopefully we'll still have them in a few years. Greg Palast, gregpalast.com. Thank you, Greg. We'll talk to you soon.
Thank you. Bye.